We are live. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yay. Okay, so to start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you have quite a successful career. So you have worked at like Deloitte, Google, AWS, Rubrik, like name a company. I feel like a lot of the big companies, as well as like the most recently, you were a partner at Felicis, now Felicis Ventures, and now you're a venture partner. Um, and VP of engineering at 1Password. Why don't we start with like what were some core career lessons that you have take like early on you have learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into who we are today?
Yeah, sure. Well, Grace, you did a great job reading through all the logos. And to answer your question, they're all very B2B infra companies, which no surprise that those are areas that I focus on investing here at Felicis. A couple of things, and these are, I would say, life lessons that I'm sharing with others as well, which is one, always be curious, right? Learn about new areas. Yes, while you can say, you've worked in government, right? You've worked in network infra, right? Storage infra, and now security at 1Password. Those are still very different areas, right? Each one of those sectors has billions of dollars in total addressable market. So while they're related, they're not the same. And that's intentional because I love forcing myself and really getting myself out of my comfort zone and learn new things. I think number two is make friends, right? There's a famous book I'm sure everybody has read, right? How to Make Friends and Win Influence. But it's so true because whether you're in Silicon Valley or you're in other tech hubs around the country, around the world now, right? Especially with hybrid work and remote work, friends and networks, professional friends, are how you discover new opportunities, new deals, and new ways of doing things. And really, as one person put it really well, your network is your net worth, right? And that's super, super true, especially in these days where you can Zoom call someone in France right now, right? Or you can get on a signal chat with someone who's based out of Eastern Europe. So those boundaries no longer exist. So why should those boundaries exist for you, right? Expand your horizons. And also disrupt yourself, right? If you think about yourself as a product, right? It's time to disrupt yourself. Roughly, I would say every probably 3 to 5 years, right? Figure out something new you can work on, even within the same company, for example, a new domain, a new area in which you are, again, forced out of your comfort zone and you have to learn the ropes from scratch, right? Those I find are some of the best times and also times that I've found most growth in, both as a working professional, but also personally.
Mm. I wonder, so like I want to maybe highlight a few things from your career before we move forward. So one thing I find really impressive is like you joined as a founding PM, third PM at Rubrik, and then you grew the team to over like 15 plus PMs, and then the company grew from like 650 to like double or triple like double the size, like to like 1400. So why don't we talk about like how do you pick a company to join from, coming from Google? And then I think another piggyback question is like not a lot of people would be successfully, let's say they're a PM somewhere and then they immediately join a different company, be like the head of cloud or like the head of something. So why don't we talk about like how do you pick the company in the first place, and then second of all, like how do you kind of accelerate your career um, to, basically scaling yourself, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I will say I was extremely lucky, and there's, I would say, now really amazing product leader at Rubrik called Annika Gupta, which I'm sure you've seen a lot about her online. She has really great first principles thinking about product management and how to build great products. But going back to kind of if we were to rewind the clock of time, right, back to this is circa 2017, I remember, because I just left Google. I was thinking about, okay, what am I going to do now? Right? Everybody's talking about joining a startup in Silicon Valley. Well, I moved out here and I joined one of the biggest tech companies in the world. So clearly, I need to also have this experience, right, of being in the Valley, working at a cutting edge startup. And going back to luck, right? Luck is honestly a big ingredient of when you reach success because you can prepare, right? You can be the most prepared person in the room. But if you don't meet the right opportunity, right? you may never see that rise. And so I would say I was very lucky in having met actually the investors in Rubrik, and those were Lightspeed and Greylock in 2017. And at the time, as you mentioned, Grace, right, the product team was very small. I remember we all fit on one long table. And in fact, the entire product and engineering team, and this is no longer true, by the way, right, we all fit actually within one building or 2 floors of one building, not even the whole building. And that actually might have also included marketing as well as sales. And Rubrik obviously then was a very different company from what it is now. But going back to kind of my life tenets of being curious, right? Surrounding yourself with the right people. And also 3, right? Disrupting yourself.
Mhm.
Well, Rubrik kind of met all of these 3 criteria in spades. And so starting with, for example, learn and be curious. I knew at the time, and this is, cloud, AWS had already been around since really 2006, 2007 is when Amazon S3, now the largest data storage platform in the world, was launched. So in 2016, 2017, the cloud's not new. But at the time, especially when you were thinking about some of the biggest enterprise companies, think big
Mhm.
banks, think big healthcare companies, they were still a
Mhm.
little hesitant about moving some of their most critical data to the cloud.
Mhm.
And Rubrik saw that as an opportunity of how can we become an enabler in that migration journey? And of course, no surprise, that
Mhm.
was the product line that I eventually grew and led, right?
Mhm.
And then 2 of my, I would say, tenets list of surround yourself with the right people. I still remember to this day my on-site interview loop at Rubrik, where I got to talk to phenomenal product leaders, as well as some of the co-founders at Rubrik,
Mhm.
including his official name is Arvind, but we
Mhm.
affectionately call him Nitro, our CTO, who led
Mhm.
all of R&D, right? He just had this amazing technical vision of how we were going to be a differentiator in enabling customers to move to the cloud, as well as in how we were protecting customers' data. And of course, Bipul, who I'm sure you just have to open LinkedIn, and he
Mhm.
has these amazing life lessons posts every day, many of which I watch and I like and I, repost, right? But he just had this amazing vision, even back in 2017, that we're going to IPO, right? And again, right, put into context of all of us, the entire company, fit on
Mhm.
2 floors of a building in downtown Palo Alto, right? All the PMs sat in one table, and yet he was this incredible leader who had this vision of we're going to IPO and this is how we're going to do it, right? And I remember still having this discussion of what is Act 1, what is Act 2, right, of the company, of the product, and how does Act 2 feed into Act 1? Like he had this all in his head. And of
Mhm.
course, that was, hit 2 of my tenants, right, in
Mhm.
real time. And the third one of disrupting, right? I just moved from government into working at Google, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. And I was also thinking of, all right, now that I've, looked at Google Fiber and network monitoring, network infrastructure, what's next? Right. And that immediately was, well, data, right? Now you're in a crucible moment where some of the largest enterprises are finally trusting the cloud with their critical data. How do you become an enabler in that movement? Right. I want to go do that. I want to disrupt what I already know and go learn a new domain. And so 3 out of 3, right? I said, wow, this is a no brainer. And of course, I'm not going to lie, Grace, right? I'm not a
Mhm.
wizard. Even though a lot of people say, wow, how did you know Rubrik was going to be the success that it is today back then? I didn't, right? And this is where, as an individual looking at your career path and what you want to do next, always go to first principles, right? What are non-negotiables for you? What are the most important career tenets for you? And how does that opportunity line up with those career tenets? Right. And that's how I made the decision. And yes, a lot of folks were, you left comfort and stability of a big company into something that, relatively was still unknown, right? Not as well known certainly as today, and uncertain, right? You can't predict 7 years, ago or 8 years ago now, right? That
Mhm.
Rubrik would be what it is today, right? If you look at, for example, its stock performance since its IPO, I believe it's more than doubled, right? And then
Mhm.
that's a feat that not many companies can claim. So kudos to the founders, right? Kudos to also Annika, the current CPO at Rubrik, for continuing that amazing success.
I wonder, so like, since Rubrik, you also have worked at like AWS. Maybe we could talk about like a few lessons on scaling. So you have been leading, I guess, like you have been working on some really exciting like areas that kind of like lead the business to $1 billion ARR for your division. So like, why don't we talk about like what were the things that you've done at AWS that you have kind of like been leveraging to maybe like in your venture career? Like what are some lessons that you've been leveraging to like, accelerate yourself to pick these like really interesting AI startups? Maybe we could start with like what were you working on at AWS, and then from like AWS data production to like I guess like building up your own team to scaling it to like managing the department.
Yeah, of course. So going back to, the three tenets, right? Being curious, surrounding yourself with the right people, and disrupting yourself. I also used that lens when AWS came calling for example, they were also looking to start their own first party native data protection platform. And at the time, 2019, it didn't exist, right? If you go online and you look at, when did AWS Backup launch, the service that many enterprises now rely on to protect their data? Well, I believe it's about April 2019. And that's right around the time that I joined AWS. So going back to learning and being curious, well, you could argue that, hey, you continue to work on data protection products, right, around this domain of compliance and ransomware recovery. And the answer is yes. But what was different, right, both around the curiosity as well as the disruption, is my role, my function greatly changed from leading product and leading a team of product managers to then over the course of 5 years at AWS, now leading an organization as a general manager. And so what does that mean? Typically within AWS in the GM model, you not only run product, but you're also run engineering and potentially other functions that all go to supporting the business on the R&D side. So for me, that also included technical program management, especially very necessary in coordinating these large releases that involve multiple service teams within AWS, as well as solutions architect. Because if you think about a fairly enterprisey sales motion that is required for data storage, right, data protection, right, it's not the PLG that we imagine with AI products today, right, where you can sign up, give your credit card. These are going to be multi-million, and sometimes in the case of AWS, tens of millions of dollars in contract value. And that requires many folks to be involved, such as technical sales to technical enablement to everyone from account management to customer support, right? There are many, many folks involved in landing a whale deal like that, right? And so not only from a GM perspective, are you responsible for building the products that help get these, millions or tens of millions of dollars in contract value, but you're also responsible for directly influencing the go-to-market teams who are carrying quota for selling your products. And so that meant for the first time, right, I had to flex into skills such as how do you price and package your products, because PMs at AWS, which I believe is a very good model, right, own pricing and packaging as well, right? There's other elements of this, which is directly engaging with go-to-market teams on what campaigns or what marketing campaigns, right, you need to latch yourself onto. As an example, right, especially for data protection, that became board level mandates of, hey, we need a recovery response, right? We need an incident response to ransomware attacks or to data breaches, right, to data exfiltration. And so that became a campaign that we would attach our products to and therefore give the entire portfolio uplift. Right. So those are just a few examples of, you might think, okay, someone coming from a traditional maybe engineering or inbound product side might not have to think about those things. But in a GM role where you are the business owner, you own the P&L, you also own the R&D, right? That becomes necessary components of your day-to-day role. And so that helped me grow into thinking of, as a bigger business leader, org leader, of how do I enable, this product, right, this business to continue growing. And, I'm proud to say, right, you dropped some very, big numbers there. And then I was proud to say that we accomplished that in under 5 years, right, with a smaller but mighty team, right, compared to other service teams who hit those milestones, but actually ended up taking longer than us to hit those milestones. And I would just say the last part, right, continuing to learn in this space. Currently, I also sit on the Cyber Resilience Advisory Board for Commvault, which is also a data protection company, another public listed company in that space, right? And there, I would say a lot of lessons that I learned from Rubrik days, from AWS days, still very much apply in how I advise the C-suite as well as the other advisory members on how to better drive our product line, or, for example, how to be competitive, right, in this changing landscape.
I wonder, since you mentioned about like, be on the, I guess, like the engineering side, there was a lot of, that you were in charge of also managing the pricing or like the marketing or like the go to market and everything. So basically you're managing a mini startup within that ecosystem. I guess like how do you think about like as like for example, let's say to generate $1 billion ARR, like what does it take? Like so how many kind of like clients do you have to sell to, or like do you start from the business angle on like, hey, here's like, our core client X, Y, and Z, and like we need to achieve um like we need to help them like I guess like deploy one type of product to like make sure they um continues like the contract with us, or like how do you think about from the business lens that like building a product that continuously sell to these like larger, I don't know if you guys are selling to larger organization. I assume like $1 billion AR is like a lot of big or small company, but how do you think about like pricing the product or like the go to market side of the product to what do you need to do as the director of like product engineering slash GM to like actually build the product and the function, or do you build the product first and then, or like since I feel like AWS will never do like MVP, like minimum viable product to launch to the clients, what that's what I would assume. But how do you guys like kind of like test out where your product is at to like to actually sell to these like bigger, I guess like to sell to like $1 billion?
Yeah, of course. Well, you packed a lot into one question, Grace. So that's very impressive. Yeah, and look, I mean, what I always tell folks, right, and especially I would say PMs who are ambitious, right, who want to go build the next $1 billion idea or $10 billion idea. Look, revenue is a lagging indicator. It's an output of success.
Mhm,
It's not actually what you should chase. And I know that
mhm,
might sound a little contradictory based on what we're
mhm,
talking now, but I firmly believe if you are solving the right problem for your customers, right, you're going to
mhm,
grow to a billion, more than a billion. Which actually the product portfolio I was leading at AWS is now on its way to potentially several, right, at this point.
mhm,
Um, right, so it's really understanding from your customers what is a must solve problem that they need to tackle, that
mhm,
without you, right, their business doesn't run. Without you, they are vulnerable to ransomware attacks, right? Without you, for example, they can't prove compliance to their board, right?
mhm,
Whichever one of these challenges or gaps are where no one else but you can solve for them, right? And
mhm,
that becomes in itself the billion plus dollar idea. Because if
mhm,
you're building that, right? And this is oftentimes what I talk about founders. Are you a painkiller or are you a vitamin, right?
mhm,
Vitamins are good. We all know we should be taking vitamin C. Heck, I'm a little
mhm,
deficient on vitamin C right now. I should go
mhm,
take more. But is that going to prevent me from doing my job, right? Is that going to prevent me from showing up for things I need to show up for?
mhm,
No, it's nice to have, but it's not a must have. On the other side, if you have a major migraine, right, or headache,
mhm,
well, not having a painkiller is going to prevent you from doing your job. And so now bring it back to what you're building, right? Your product needs to be that level of criticality in order for you to gain success. And so oftentimes now coming to more on the investment side of things as well, right? I talk to
mhm,
brilliant, amazingly technical founders with many more degrees than I have or will ever have, right? PhDs from some of the best schools.
mhm,
And but oftentimes the conversation does feel like a brilliant solution in looking for a problem. And that is a space where you may find disappointment if you don't find that ultimate holy grail of a problem that I just described. Better yet, and probably more efficient, to then go looking for problems in which then you can come up with solutions. And that is really in essence what the Amazon's working backwards truly means, right? In essence.
Mhm.
Sure, there's tactical things like a PR FAQ or a vision document. Great, right? These are all tactical things.
Mhm.
But to truly understand the essence of what Jeff Bezos meant of working backwards in the customer is really going out and finding problems that then you can come up with solutions for. And so if you look at what every PM within AWS is very familiar with, which is our PR, standing for press release, FAQ, frequently asked questions. That's how the document starts. It actually starts with a PR, as you would imagine an external PR firm saying about your product, about your launch with customer
Mhm.
quotes, which there's special call outs, right? In paragraph 3 or in paragraph 2, you have to talk about the customer problem. In paragraph 3, then you have to talk about how what your product does makes their life better. And it just trains you as a product person to think about, okay, what is the problem that I'm solving? And then why is it that how I'm solving the problem actually makes their life better? And so training yourself to think in that mental framework makes you customer focused first, right? Without falling into any of the traps of, you might have heard, let's not be
Mhm.
competitor obsessed, but be customer
Mhm.
obsessed. And these
Mhm.
are all ways that you can help yourself, right? Stay on the right
Mhm.
track as a product leader.
I love that. I really like, obviously I'm a big fan of like the Amazon leadership principle. And like you mentioned, like instead of focusing on like what your competitors are building, like really go hone in on like the biggest problem that you can solve. I have like some piggyback question on there, but like I also want to jump into the investing side of things. So you have been a product advisor to Mercor. I just saw the CEO talk at Notion last week. It was like very interesting. And I think like one of the biggest thing I've learned from his talk was actually also just like really identify where like basically identify your like where customer want things are like what are the something that your customer truly want, really following the trends of like, seeing like, major traction, focus on like whatever where the traction is coming from to like kind of build a successful product. Maybe we could start with like, since you have seen a lot of really interesting startups, how do you quickly filter out like what are something that is defensible, and for like a Mercer out there, there must be like 10 different founders that are building something very similar in a space. How do you quickly filter out like what is something that you would spend your energy and time on as an
Yeah,
investor?
of course. So the tenets I'm going to say are probably not all that different from my personal career
Mhm.
tenets of curiosity, surround yourself with the right people, and disrupt yourself. Well, so starting with the Mercor team and what really caught our attention, right, as Felicis side, because I'm sure, as you know, Felicis led the Series B into
Mhm.
Mercor, and they have done incredible things just since even when we led the Series B late last year. And so maybe to start from as we look at this world of AI models, right, and more companies wanting to, for example, train or fine tune their own models.
Mhm.
Well, data is a huge part of that, right? And as I'm sure you've heard on podcasts with the various founders, they worked with OpenAI on a very very early stage. Right. Where if you think about OpenAI and all the vertical specialized models that they're building for
Mhm.
healthcare, right, for legal, all of these different industries.
Mhm.
Well, large public troves of that training data doesn't exist. I mean, you can scrape the internet, but you're not going to get to, for example, specialized data around, what's a niche field of law? Maybe, for example, veterinarian law, right? I'm going very niche here. Or in
Mhm.
healthcare, for example, very niche, for example, pediatric oncology. Like you can scrape public data, but that might not be specific enough for you to have a truly high performance, high functioning model. And so that comes to specialized data. And then how do you get specialized data? Right. And this is where, for example, if you look at the market of, the scale AIs or other, for example, mechanical Turks, even, right,
Mhm.
they are not potentially, having the folks who have specialized knowledge, right? Your PhDs or medical doctors who can annotate, right, large data sets for you, telling you, okay, this is good, this is bad, or doing instruction, input output pairs for you to fine tune your model. You need specialized talent. And so that is actually where the beauty and the genius of Mercor came from. And what really caught our attention at Felicis was, well, not only have they built out this marketplace and platform, right, to attract specialized talent to help their customers, do fine tuning, or in the future LHF, right, with their models, but actually they've now built this AI interviewer, which is a very sophisticated multi-agent, right, end-to-end voice agent platform that can then go out and find some of these specialized talent, right, that are maybe not applying, right, directly, but you go out and find them, right, for pennies on the dollar. Because look, it's an AI, interviewer. It doesn't get tired, right? It can do 10,000 interviews in a week if there is such demand. And so this becomes part of how we saw, wow, these founders have truly this longer term vision of not just, hey, we are going to become the marketplace of where AI native labs, where large foundation model companies come to find specialized talent for getting this specialized data to train vertical models. But also now we have this tool that we built in-house where we actually run some of this specialized talent through this AI interviewer. And guess what? Right? All of that data also becomes valuable training data. And so as we talked more with the founding team, we just got to understand like their ambition, right? Their vision for this space. And if you think about, the old adage, right? Ideas are dime a dozen. It's really about execution. And then just looking at how much the company has grown. In fact, I'm sure you saw the graphic of they are, in the top 10 companies to go from 0 to 100 million in less than 18 months. That speaks directly to execution, which execution is focus, right? In the ability to hit milestones. So just incredibly proud of the team, and also, very fortunate to have witnessed some of this evolution, especially with the AI interviewer as a product advisor.
I wonder, like you mentioned, like I want to dive a little bit deeper into the company because it's such an iconic company in the AI era. So I want to learn more about like from the data perspective. So obviously, like as you mentioned, like the different data set from these like different sub vehicle are like very hard to acquire. How do you actually have a AI interviewer to like collect these kind of data, or like I guess like what is the interview kind of like based on? So like if how is it different between like if I program something today myself on ChatGPT to like ask people questions versus like if I'm like using, because obviously I mean I've never used Mercor because I don't have like a huge team or like trying to hire people, but I guess like how do you think about the differentiation between like if I just like build something off like the traditional usual like question list or something for each subject um that's kind of like out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, so a couple things. One is I'm going to do a shameless plug of if you are curious to try out the AI interviewer, please visit mercor.com/interviews
Mhm,
and try one out, right? Give us
mhm,
feedback. I mean, that's what I love is customer feedback. Also, if you like to geek out or nerd out about our technical architecture, I do actually have the loop of the various agents and how we think about state management and
mhm,
capturing answers, later on in the conversation based
mhm,
on, for example, what you said earlier in the conversation.
mhm,
Go visit actually the New Stack article that I co-wrote with Dave Takare, who's the head of
mhm,
Robinhood. So he and I explore different agent architectures in our blog that we publish with the New Stack. And there I talk
mhm,
actually about the Mercor's AI interviewer product
mhm.
that the team built.
I
So
will also link the articles in the comments or like description.
perfect.
Oh,
Yeah. And also the URL to come and try out an interview today. That
mhm.
would be my call to action here.
Yeah, by the way I
Um,
want to maybe I will like quickly share a screen of like what it actually looks like.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, here. Wait, is it actually? Wait, hold on. Sorry, I
I
have
can't
something
see your
to add
screen.
to the
Yeah. There we
stage.
go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So maybe we could start with like what you were saying. So basically, I guess like when if I'm a random person, because I think from his talk he was saying like at the beginning the use case was like from like there's a lot of like talents in India or like something like that. So like basically the overseas talent, they could, I guess they could just use these they could just like start doing the interviews, and then you collect data. I guess like what type of data would you kind of like collect? Is that just like their answers, or like just like only the qualified people, or like how you think about it basically?
Yeah. So if you think about the North Star metric, right,
Mhm,
of what is a successful AI interviewer product, it's really reducing the time from interview to hire, right, or
mhm,
from application to hire. Because, I mean, as we all know, right, today those cycles are really long. Right, you have to interview, then wait for the results,
mhm,
and as a candidate, right, there's also this big question around fairness and equity because
mhm,
who interviews you, right? Or look, who interviews you, what mood they're in, right? Do they have a good meeting before you? Were they, like, did they wake up from the wrong side of the bed, right? All of these questions, all of these factors, frankly, that are outside of your control may actually have an impact on your interview outcome, right? Or your
mhm,
performance, which,
mhm,
that's what you get with human interviewers. Now,
mhm,
with AI interviewers, right, there's this concept of equity and fairness in which the team baked into the product from day one, which is okay, around, let's say I'm interviewing for an entry level management consulting role, with BCG, for example,
mhm,
or McKinsey, right? Any one of these, or Bain, right? Pick your favorite consulting firm. Based on that role, right? What questions or what skill sets do I absolutely need to know if I were to be successful in this role? And the AI interviewer product is designed such that based on the job description, right,
mhm,
based on the requirements for the job, it's able to come up and construct, right, an interview set of questions to make sure that, hey, if someone can answer these questions with, you know, fairly confident levels of competency, right, success, that they could be a good candidate, right, for a final onsite. And that is, I would say, direct impact, right? If you were sitting in the shoes of a hiring manager, of how this tool can help you reduce the time of application to hire, right? And
mhm,
so the ROI is very clear. Now, of course, I'm going a little bit under the hood, and I don't want to repeat what's in the article. Of course, please read and give me feedback. But under the hood, there is a complex set of systems, right, that pass around state. Because let's say, we start talking about, just like in this interview, for example, my
mhm,
experience is at Rubric. And let's
mhm,
say, maybe what I built there now informs what I'm building at 1Password. Well, as an agent, how do you connect the dots, right? As a human, obviously, you probably parked my answer around Rubric somewhere in your memory, right? And now that we're talking about potentially, hey, what I'm doing at 1Password, how we're thinking about, launching multiple products this year, you're like, hey, didn't we talk about that earlier in our conversation when we were discussing Rubric, right? As a human, it's very easy for you to connect the dots. As an agent, well, how do you do that? Well, you do that because you're going to store my previous answers to your questions somewhere, right? And then be able to now retrieve that context as you're asking me follow on questions, and also storing my answers to those questions. So,
mhm,
in that way, right, the goal is to simulate as human as possible of an interview experience with a fully autonomous agentic system, right? And
mhm,
so that's, I would say, the beauty of this AI interviewer product that I have not seen from other interview products out there in the market.
mhm. I wanna so this is your article, by the way. So, Samir is asking what's the spelling of the AI tool website. It's Mercor, so which is Mercor. So, and then this is like Nancy's article, if everyone's like wondering. If you want to like quickly like give us like a quick overview, we can also do that. Depends on you.
Yeah, sure. So this is, I would say level 200 deep dive into what actually
Mhm,
happens under the hood here, right? Which is, I just mentioned to Grace, one of the things that we thought about was state persistence, right? So
mhm,
similarly, just like if you were building a series of lambdas in a microservice architecture, you need to store, for example, the state, right? Which is, hey, I kicked off this job. This job had X and X metadata, this status, right? Let me store it somewhere. So for the
mhm,
next worker, right, that comes up and takes this, state, capture state,
mhm,
they can then start their next job or their next, workflow with this prior state, and they don't have to start all over. Same thing, right? In this AI interviewer, we're also thinking about like, how do we capture state somewhere, right? And we store it either with managed memgpt leta or in other vector stores, for example. There's also things, for example, that as we wait, right? So one of the things that in the pursuit of a more human-like experience, right? You don't want the candidate, just like in this interview, to sit here and wait for Grace to think about her next question for 3 seconds. Probably not a great experience for me, right? As a person being interviewed. Same thing as an interview candidate. You probably don't want the candidate sitting there and waiting for you to just transcribe what they just said into text, feed that text into a reasoning model, right? And then wait for that reasoning model to say, oh, that was an interesting question. Let me think about the next or answer, right? Let me think about the next question as it relates to the job that Grace is interviewing for, right? And then transcribing that text back to speech. That's probably, the loop is about 2 to 3 seconds, and that's a very long time. So there's also other intelligence that we're building into the loop, for example, such as speculative responses, right? Which is, well, maybe, Grace hasn't finished her answer completely. Maybe it's about 60% complete. But what if actually we were to use that 60% completion, feed it into the model, and so the model can generate the next question. And even if, like, let's say we're, not 100%, accurate based on the 40% that she has left, it solves for the latency problem and it keeps the conversation going. Right? So
Wow.
those are, giving a little sneak peek, things that I would say the team is working on and focus behind the scenes, so that candidate experience, right, or candidate CSAT score is also something that, the team's closely monitoring, and something that will help the interviewer, I would say, agent or platform, reach more candidates because they're having a positive experience.
I wonder, so like for the data that's collected, I would assume like it's like very valuable to any industry, which is like making the company even more like valuable. And I wonder from the business model perspective, like so far, are they I guess when, let's say, like an OpenAI working with them, how do you think about like monetization? So it doesn't have to be like very specific if they have like a specific criteria, but like I guess like what's the overall sentiment of like how do you kind of like leveraging the data to do something even more interesting. And for the current like charging model, since like we were on the website, there were like various different industry, from like consulting to writing to finance to data science. So there's like various different type of questions. How do you tackle the fact that like it's various different type of things that people may be looking for? Some may require like, I guess, like a soft skill. Like what are the questions that would be like shaped differently versus if I'm like doing, I guess, consulting interview, it's like a structured answer.
Yeah. Well, and that goes to the overall ethos, right, of Mercor, which if you go onto their documentation site, they talk about an open box approach versus a black box approach, right? And that's what we talked about earlier on in terms of differentiation. Is with Mercor, you understand what you're getting, right? What your experts are doing, right? And you're able to give them instructions and also view their performance real time. And you can also get confidence based on their responses to the AI interviewer, right? And how they perform during that interview, that they actually are experts in the fields that they claim to be experts in, which are things you'd be surprised, but are not there with other competitor solutions or products out there. So definitely refer to this because it actually walks you through how they think about open box or being transparent and giving customers visibility.
For sure. I think it's, yeah.
I was going to say, and then, to follow up to that, the ethos around the AI interviewer is that anyone is able to create any interview for any job, right? So what that also means, right, down the line is, don't be surprised that there's live coding interviews conducted by Mercor, right? Where you're able to share your screen or shared code snippets or do the interview directly from your IDE, right? Those are all, I would say, ways where if we think about what are the jobs, right, employers are currently hiring for, what skills do they need, what skills proof, right? Or walking through your own human chain of reasoning do you need to, provide during the interview? The goal really there is to meet your customers where they are and provide any platform that is capable of doing all of these things, right? And that's ultimately the vision of what it means to build a successful AI interviewer. And like I said, one of the things that we caught in the Felicis team about the founders and their vision is, that is so holistic, right? And thinking about, we're not just going to build this marketplace, we're also going to build this AI interviewer to attract top quality candidates. And also in terms of these candidates then doing these interviews, this is how their quality data, right, feeds back into how we understand, what are the top, let's say, jobs being created? What are the top industries that are growing by headcount? What are the most popular skills, right, that we should provide more, let's say, deeper, assessments for, right? And it just gives you this signal about the market that you are not going to find in public sources.
For sure. I wonder, so like one of the question asked by the audience is like, Samir asked like, usually voice-based AI has hard time understanding non-native English speakers' accent. What be done by companies making more? What could be done by company that make it more inclusive?
Yeah, so I can't speak on specific things, done by the team right now. But what I can say as part of an industry, right, being more inclusive, is, for example, yes, there are going to be folks with non-native English speaking ways of speaking, right? Their use of vocabulary might be different. There might be an accent, right? And part of this is also how do you globalize the entire world, right? We're not just, and part of this also speaks to the inclusion and diversity angle that I'm very, passionate about. How do you not just hire folks who come from a few zip codes, right? And that's really San Francisco, San Jose, right? East Bay, but really you're opening up the talent pool to, very talented engineers coming from, Estonia, right? Or India or Pakistan or any one of these countries, right? Who have the right skills and who are able to do the job. And it's going to come from innovations like Mercor's AI interviewer, because now you're able to go out there, find these people, interview them on their own schedule, on their own time, but also have the intelligence to what Samir mentioned, right, of understanding and recognizing, well, they might not sound like or speak like, right, a native English speaker, but that doesn't mean they don't have the skills, right, to also do the job and do the job well.
Mm. I wonder, so since like we chat about Mercor, but like maybe we could talk about like from the sourcing perspective, since I think like sourcing and winning perspective, like how do you think about finding and like winning the best like AI startups? I think for Mercor, obviously there is like a huge data to kind of like back it, because they have like a very like substantial growth trajectory. But when you are interacting with some of the companies, probably they didn't really have a product yet, or like let's say you go to like a YC summer demo day or something. Like, how do you quickly filter out like what are the company that actually worth tracking, and what are some like characteristics that you are looking for to um, filter out the companies?
Understood. Yeah, I would say, in terms of what we look for, and then I'll now go back into kind of what is an advantage, right, for Felice's team. So what we typically look for, going back to again people, and keep in mind as well, right, this is very specific to the companies that I usually look at. Aside from Mercor, I typically focus on early stage infrastructure and security investments. And so with those companies, especially at the seed Series A, you may not have obviously the astronomical numbers that we were just talking about, right? 0 to 100 million. I mean, especially, not the case in very early stage security companies where they do have to go through this enterprise, sales motion, sales cycle. So then, in lieu of numbers, what do you assess on? And oftentimes I assess on founders, because very early stage, you have to have the grit, you have to have the hustle, right? Persistence to be able to go through potential challenges, right? That you're facing in hiring the right people, right? Going through a bunch of no's. Maybe you have to go through 90 no's to get one yes from a big enterprise customer. Are you willing to take that level of rejection and keep at it, right? That's a necessary skill as a founder. Two is, how you think about differentiation. Because oftentimes in security and infrastructure, it takes a long time to build, to your point, an MVP or MLP, which I like to use, most lovable product, right? It takes time. It is not something that, unfortunately, I hate saying this, but you can vibe code in a day, right? It might take 6 months, 9 months, maybe even a year plus, right, to launch, let's say, an enterprise grade security product. So that means you have to have a very strong vision, because in a year, as you've seen, right, with this space, even with AI security, things change, right? Your competitors change. They might even go out of business, right, or get acquired. So how is your vision going to be durable for that amount of time, right? And so that goes back to, are you able to answer not just, okay, what are you building, but also the second degree, third degree questions, which is, why do you think what you're building is going to be sustainable? Or what do you think is different about your initial use case, your initial wedge? What is your right to win, right? So a lot of these questions that, look, it might be uncomfortable, right, being asked that, because it might, be very, sound like personal, intrusion or questions, but those are necessary in helping found or investors gain confidence in what you're building and your company as a founder. And then I would say the last part is, aside from, people, the vision part, is also your understanding, right, of the overall market and market dynamics. Because as I mentioned, the market does change very quickly, right? So how do you know what you're building now will, be applicable in 12 and 18 months? And that goes back to your understanding of the customers in the market and why, their needs are not going to change, or how you're going to change with their changing needs, as well as the industry players, right? Which is, look, we all know who the big companies are in the security space, right? Palo Alto Networks, right? Zscaler, CrowdStrike, so on and so forth. How are you going to play with them, right? Everything ultimately is co-opetition. But do you know what integrations you're going to build first? Do you know what partnerships you're going to announce first? And so that all boils down to you as a founder, and also your vision, right? Because you're not going to build your way there entirely, right? You're going to have partnerships, integrations. And this goes back to something I mentioned earlier, Grace, which is with very technical founders, right? This might be an area they're new to, right? They haven't had to think about, because if you were working at, let's say, a CrowdStrike or Palo Alto, you probably have go-to-market teams thinking about partnerships, business development, right? Partnership integrations. But as a founder, you are the engineer, you are the PM, you are also BD, right? So you have to be able to think through all of these scenarios.
I wonder, for like some of your portfolio companies, I'm sure there are talents that are trying to join these portfolio companies. So I wonder, when it comes to like reference from, since like you mentioned at the beginning, when you joined Rubric, it was kind of like you chat with VCs from Greylock, or like, other mm, just like people who have like invested in the company. For example, let's say like any of the listener are trying to join like a Mercor or any of your other portfolio companies, what would be your suggestion for them? And how do you think about like what are these companies are looking for beyond, obviously I think a lot of companies are looking for just technical skills, but um what are some like trends that you're seeing for, especially for like, I'm just gonna ask for the non-technical people, because I think we're at the edge of like there's a lot of things that could be done by AI, if candidates are like very fluent in like different AI tools. Should they be considered as good candidate, or like does everybody have to be very technical to join like a founding team of these very hot startups?
So, I mean, if we take the case of Mercor, right, there are strategic project leads
Mhm,
who don't have a computer science background. And that's actually one thing. You might think, hey, to be a part of these early AI teams, I
mhm,
have to be a super technical engineer, or I have to, be a math Olympiad, for example. Some of the teams that I do meet are all, award-winning math Olympiads.
mhm,
I mean, it's an interesting trend for sure. But I would say, don't let that deter you. However, with
mhm,
that said, right, for anyone, and this is
mhm,
both technical and non-technical candidates, right, walk into that interview with a point of view, right? Don't just be ready to answer interview questions because you think that's what you need to do. Yes, do that and do a good job answering interview questions, but also have a story around why them, and also importantly, why you, right? Especially for some of these, I mean, some of the hottest AI companies
Mhm.
out there. We all know them by name, right? Cursor, right? Lovable,
Mhm.
Mercor being one of them, right? I mean, many, many others. They have no shortage of candidates, right? I'm sure if you want to work there, a lot of folks will also want to work there. So
Mhm.
the question is, why you? And this goes back to how, I always thought about my career, and happy to share some of those learnings and mental frameworks, is thinking about, well, how do you think about your career, and more importantly, yourself as a product, right? And so if you were to go to market, right, bring yourself as a product to market,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you should think about, right? And how do you position yourself as a candidate, right? How do you position your strengths and also with your vision, right? And how does that align with the company's vision? And I find oftentimes, as a board member or investment partner, I do get brought into a lot of these interview loops, and especially for more of the leadership level candidates, right? That is, I would say, a necessary part of the conversation, right? It's not just, by that point, we already know you can do the job, but more so, why do you think you're the right person for the job? And why do we believe, right, that with you on the team, the company is poised for an even better trajectory? And yes, you might think, okay, those are senior level questions,
Mhm.
but honestly, never too early to start, right? Even if you're applying for a junior business role, right, that could also be a very good skill to start building.
Mm. How do you prioritize your role at Felicis and now at like 1Password?
That is a billion-dollar question, Grace. And if you have a perfect answer for me, I'd love to hear. Look, going back to again, I'm a very curious person, and I do believe in what Jeff Bezos has always said, which is work-life harmony. And
Mhm.
what I mean by work life harmony is venture and the ability to work with amazing early stage technical teams, right? Founding teams, in my opinion, actually helps me be better at my other job, which is at scale, operating at scale, leading engineering teams, helping to build the next phase of what does authentication, right, and security look like in an AI native world. And so being able to talk to early stage founders who are going through very similar journeys, potentially building products that we could partner
Mhm.
with, simply expands the ecosystem. And that's really what brings me joy in being able to do both.
Mm. I want to be mindful of the time. I don't know if you have like a few minutes or we have to wrap within 1 minute. Um,
Let's see. It's my uh uh
Sorry
I
that.
can do um I might have to wrap up as I have to go to a partnership meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do like quick 30-second fire round for you. What's your favorite book?
Ooh, Radical Candor
Oh,
by
love.
Kim Scott.
Was a past guest on our show.
Yeah,
Uh, who would you invite to your dinner party?
Michelle Obama.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
One of my former leaders at AWS called Wayne Duso.
Where can we find you outside of work?
I like lifting heavy, so my local CrossFit gym. Please
Oh,
join me
wow.
for a workout.
Love that. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for having me, Grace.
Let me quickly